So here with us tonight, I'm really pleased to announce we've got Moritz Schrodl. He is the lead architect at the St Mary's Works development, just up the road, and he's also the head of studio at Our Place. We have Caroline Meyers. She's the head of marketing at the Norwich Business Improvement District and VisitNorwich. And we also have Jonny Gibson, who's a senior designer here at Norwich agency Borne. So a big round of applause, please, for our panel. So the first question I've got really is, we've just seen a pretty incredible Gary Huswit documentary film. What did you find the most inspiring thing about this film? Maybe you can kick us off, Moritz.
Personally, from my experience as an architect, I always try to find the essence in whatever it is we're doing, and that came out. A couple of people have said that in the movie, that in graphic design, that's a key objective. You're trying to simplify something that's actually quite complex, and you're trying to think about what it is that you're trying to achieve in the end. In our case, it's creating real architecture, and then you look around at a lot of the things that get built these days, and a lot of it is actually, it doesn't necessarily qualify as architecture in, I think, a lot of people's opinions. And what does it take to actually boil it down and to actually create something that's meaningful and true and genuine in a way? And I think that's where all creative industries sort of overlap, and it's always that search for something that means something.
Yeah, that's interesting. So, Jonny, you're a typographer and you create fonts and things. So you must have taken quite a lot from.
As a graphic designer, I think anything Swiss is kind of the nostalgic heyday of design brilliance. So that's lovely. But I think the thing that inspired me the most, probably about that, is as a designer, you often work on projects of different lengths, and you kind of have more or less time to think about the longevity of the thing that you do. And it's interesting hearing some of the guys talk about some of the marks that they kind of made and worked on, but then hearing some of the other people talk about how they would grow up around some of those identities and how that kind of formed their idea of Canada or their kind of home and stuff like that. And I think it's a really interesting thing for me to take away, to kind of next time you come to a branding project, think about wider than just the goals of the mark or the thing that you're making into what this can do for the culture or the societies.
So Caroline, I was sitting next to you during the film and noticed you furiously scribbling notes throughout it. Caroline, you've been working on the place branding actually for Norwich over the last few months.
10 months.
10 months.
So it's been a while in the brewing.
Yeah, and so you clearly took a lot away from that.
I was saying to Kate earlier that I had two emotions from watching the film. One was no pressure, and the other one was phew, because actually we've done so much kind of looking at best practice, and we're thinking big, so countries as well as cities, and there were just so many things that resonated. So the fact that you can have storytelling within a mark, and that simplicity is key, but it's also how you develop and launch a brand. And I loved, it was one of the first statements about we're best and we're operating like a band. And that's almost the mentality that we've got in terms of hopefully how we're going to launch the new brand for Norwich.
Sure, yeah. So Jonny, what's your favourite example of place branding and this sort of work?
There's quite a lot to choose from. I'd say more often than not, I love, as they kind of had in there, the kind of Olympic branding. I think that's an interesting take on place branding because it's a much more consolidated and condensed version of an identity for a place. If I had to pick an actual place, the one that jumps to mind is Porto did a redesign of their brand. It was quite a while back now. I think it was like 2015, but they took there's all these kind of white and blue tiles throughout the city of Porto, and they basically built a new identity around these tiles, but kind of modernising them, so you have that thick kind of line work around it, and became like this like atomic system that you could kind of create and build on an identity. And what I really liked about it actually, because I think this is often rare in place branding, but it's how it actually rolled out beyond just the mark and the identity, and how the city really kind of took it up, and how you could see it across different, buses and trams and that kind of stuff, and how everyone kind of really got behind it to bring it to life above and beyond just the mark itself. But there's loads. I mean, just go to Google and there's fantastic branding for places. So.
Yeah, it did seem like that was a key part of the film that we saw tonight, actually, was that getting the community around something and actually seeding it through all these different mediums is really important. Have you got I mean, you must have done lots of research into this recently.
I've got about 6 that I love,
Okay.
but my favourite is Eindhoven in the Netherlands, and I don't know if you've seen it, but the mark's inspired by 3 bars of energy, so it's the home of Philips Electronics. But what they did is they created open access artwork, so you've got people across all walks of life interpreting the brand in their own way. You've got chefs making food in the shape of the mark. You've got artists interpreting it. So I just think that's really exciting, and it feels like a really collaborative, different way of launching. So, and they've got a group of brand guardians as well, so it kind of lives and breathes and evolves. So that's quite exciting.
Yeah, excellent. I'm really surprised that, given that we've seen the the Montreal Olympics logo in the 1960s with the sort of the podium and the Olympic rings and everything else, that you haven't said the 2012 London logo, which clearly is a marvel of modern design. What about you, Moritz? Have you got any examples that you really love?
Recent examples that I quite liked were Coldrop's Yard in London. I think they've done a really good job. Again, something that you've said earlier, thicker lines and everything being quite... it feels like it's very digital led, which I think is quite refreshing. A lot of the architectural branding that you see a lot these days is actually quite boring. Often you look at something and it all looks the same. I think they've gone out of their way to do something different, which I quite liked.
Yeah, excellent. So Moritz, what do you think the perception of Norwich is at the moment? Obviously, coming from outside, you've got a bit of a different perspective to, I imagine, most of the people in this room. What do you think Norwich looks like from outside?
For me personally, it's coming to Norwich. I'm from an area near Munich, city called Regensburg, which is similar size, and it's got a very similar feel to it. So coming to Norwich for me is always refreshing. I've lived in London for 6 years now, and London's got a certain energy that I think at a certain time I needed in my life, but then at the moment it's quite good. Sam and I talked about this on the way up. Every time we come to Norwich, we really enjoy just walking around, and we run a tech hub in Colgate called St. George's Works, and you walk in there and you talk to the people and everyone's got a smile on their face, and that's something that you often forget when you live in a busy city, in a hustle bustle place like London, where everyone's just seems to be running from meeting to meeting. So I think the overall perception that I've experienced that people have of Norwich outside Norwich is more quiet, more laid back. I didn't know much about Norwich when I first started working on the project, and the first time I came up and started talking to people, I started realizing there's actually quite a lot here. There's a lot of creative energy, there's a lot of people who seem to be wanting to do things, and what we're really interested in is bringing all that together and sort of giving people a platform and a hub where they can come together, exchange opinions, and then go out into something meaningful. So,
Jonny, are you from Norwich originally?
No, I'm not. No,
Oh, right.
no, I'm an expat, I guess. Yeah, I grew up in Brighton, and then my wife and I moved to London, and now I'm in Norwich.
So was your first perception of Norwich Alan Partridge?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I think I was talking to somebody about this like a couple of weeks ago. I didn't really know that Norwich existed, in all honesty, until I met my now wife, who's from this neck of the woods. I think it's tough because it's a destination city rather than a through point. So I think for a lot of places they benefit from being on the way to somewhere else, or connected to place in some way, which Norwich obviously doesn't quite have. So I think it's a blessing and a curse. Kind of living in that kind of obscurity, because you don't have something that you have to overcome in quite the same way. It's kind of a blank canvas, but also it's a totally blank canvas. So,
Yeah, no pressure.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, I mean, clearly you will have done a lot of research on this over the last 10 months or so. What do you think the overriding perception of Norwich is from outside the region?
So it's really interesting to hear your responses, because it was born out of all the research. We did national research on what people perceive Norwich to be. And they said, I don't know. It's a vacuum. So it's not negative, it's just there's nothing there. So way back when we did an application for City of Culture, and one of the reasons we didn't get shortlisted is because we didn't have a clear narrative. So we absolutely need a new narrative to put Norwich on the map, but people are really open to it and they want to be encouraged to find out more. So we did this thing called mobile ethnography, so it was a cheaper an innovative way of finding out nationally what people thought, where they record through their mobile phone some tasks throughout a week. And as they discovered more about Norwich, they were like, why haven't I heard about it? This is just the place I want to go for a city break. So we know we deliver. It's just getting over the hurdle of getting on the map and getting on the radar.
Okay. So Moritz, what do you think the most interesting recent development is in the place branding of Norwich as a city?
I think I can't actually give you a good answer because I can't think of one that actually comes to my mind directly. I've seen is it called Bid Norwich, the video?
We're the enabler, so Norwich Business Improvement District, we're helping bring everyone together. But we've done a teaser film, so there is a pre-existing platform. Do you want me to go into that now?
We'll come back
But
to
it's
it
interesting
later,
to say that you kind of couldn't place something immediately because that's what people are craving. What is the hook? It needs to be a simple hook and then you can tell more.
It's indicative of that blank slate. I mean, Jonny, do you have anything that you can think of that's happened in Norwich recently that gives you that feel of what it's about?
I think the thing that comes to mind first is that like Anglia Square stuff. I think what happens with Anglia Square will be a telling sign for at least the local people for how Norwich is, how it's managed, what we're doing moving forward. I think Norwich, having been here a while now, is like fiercely independent as a place. I think we back our own horses, and I think you see a lot of that, especially with the Anglia Square development. There's a lot of kind of local stuff, people that have been there for a long time. I think on the one hand, there's the danger that we could lose some of that, and that would be an indication of perhaps a direction that we're moving, or we really get behind that. And again, that's an opportunity. So I think I'll be watching to see what happens with that.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing about that as well is that you've got lots of people who are very connected to the region and don't want things to change. You've got them sort of young people who want to see change in the city, but then we also have the yellow and green of Norwich City Football Club fighting against the yellow and black of Norfolk's flag and all these different things. I mean, what do you think the biggest hurdle is, given that you've got all these challenges, these creative challenges, creating good design and seeding it through everything? Caroline, what do you think the biggest challenge is going to be in creating a new brand for this city?
Well, there's certainly the ambition and appetite for it. I think where we're challenged is budget. To get cut through, you have honeypot destinations like York and Bath, and they put multi-million pounds into their place branding and marketing. We don't have quite that level, but we do have a creative city, and we can do things a little bit differently as well. So it's just, I think the key thing is to get alignment, that everyone's on the same page. And mostly when I talk to lots of different groups, it's kind of everyone has this hunger to celebrate and promote the city. So it's funding, resources, and alignment, but we're getting there, I think.
Yeah.
This is part of it, to get the conversation going.
And given that you're working on the St Mary's Works project, and there's the St George's, which is actually now a community of people, do you think that there's a place for you to add to that? And is that a hurdle that we can overcome through the way that our architects are designing the city even?
Absolutely. I think doing basically what we're trying to create something that doesn't necessarily exist yet in that form. We're trying to shake things up a little bit, trying to create a workspace that will give people a platform, like I said earlier, that will bring people together. We're actually investing quite a lot of money into something that people are telling us isn't really, doesn't make sense. As a company, there's easier ways to make money. Like you can invest into residential schemes, and there's more money in that. But we do believe that there is a crowd here that will take up the offer once we've made the first step. And St George's Works is the best proof for that in many ways, because 3 years ago there was nothing there. It was derelict warehouse buildings, and now we've got 300 people, I think, working at St George's Works, 70 companies. We've got a waiting list, so people are actually waiting for us to develop the next phase. And we're putting a lot of effort into designing St. Mary's Works and trying to actually take up the industrial heritage of the city, also in times where a lot of the old businesses, a lot of the old business that Norwich stood for, like Coleman's, are closing factories. So I think we need to think ahead and basically work out what is the future of the city, what is the made in Norwich stamp of the future. And a lot of the companies that work on our site are AI companies. They're in fashion, they're in digital marketing, and I think there's so much going on there, and we don't even have to input. All we do is we give them the space, we give them the fast internet, which you can probably talk about more than I don't know if that's fast enough. That seems to be the main problem always. And hopefully something interesting will come together, and things will align, and then I think things will just run.
Yeah, okay. So Jonny, what do you think, given the film we've seen today, what's the one thing that you think we should all take away from that film that we've just seen?
Two things?
You can have
two things. I think the first thing, which I think actually is really refreshing to hear, it's kind of happening already, but is the kind of a collaborative, everyone buys in approach to kind of branding and creating an identity for a place. I think in the heyday of graphic design, it would be given to a person and they kind of run and do their thing, and then there'd be a big reveal, and then that would get rolled out. But I think like an open source approach to branding and identity design is really refreshing, and actually I think that's something we should do more. So great. And also I think the other thing is there's a danger with films like this might be controversial, but obviously again they're so looking back at what was done and why we did it and how it worked and how we love it and it's like classic design, but must remember that at the time what they were doing was new and innovative, and actually it was kind of bold and slightly different. So don't look back with too much of like a rose-tinted glass approach and try and refit that for now, but actually take the process rather than the execution, I think is probably what I'd say.
I'm glad I gave you two.
Yeah, there you go.
Caroline, what about you?
I suppose a lot of amazing place branding is also about place making, but equally, when you're developing something, it shouldn't just be about the past. It should be about the ambition for the future.
Yeah.
And who are we at BID or Visit Norwich to say what the brand for the city? It's evolved from a destination campaign because the BID are involved in things such as wayfinding and signage around the city. So we've got an opportunity to drive consistency across the fabric of the city, including the urban art. So we've talked to so many people, engaged with so many communities, and the design community is key, that we actually think now is a really good time. The stars are kind of aligning that we can actually do something, and hopefully everyone will get behind it.
Great. Yeah. What about you, Moritz? What one thing would you take away from the film tonight?
Overall, I think for me the importance of graphic design for actual placemaking. Because I always, maybe that was naive, but I always thought that if you create a good product, people will just buy into it. But there's actually, it doesn't work like that at all, and that's what I've experienced over the last 2 years. That you have to go out and you have to talk to people. If you don't talk to people and if you don't show them what you're doing, no one knows that you're actually like doing the work or trying or whatever. You have to almost sell it, and that's where good graphic design for me comes in and makes the difference, or makes it a lot easier.
Yeah, great.
Can I add one more?
Yeah, go for it.
And I think what came through there is don't pretend to be something you're not, and just don't put a veneer. It has to be authentic. It has to resonate with people that live there as well.
So that's a great lead into my last question before we take some questions from you, which is for you, Caroline. What do you think then that the city of Norwich should be known for?
Okay, I'm going to put it out there, and you might have seen it anyway in the teaser, but it's not what I think. It's kind of, we've done a lot of testing of lots of different territories, and where we are very lucky because we had a pre-existing positioning of the City of Stories, and it was originally in 2014 as a platform to promote the city as a destination for leisure and for tourism. But when we really dug, we've got authentic meaning behind that, because we were awarded England's first UNESCO City of Literature. The UEA pioneered the MA in creative writing, which is 50 years old next year, and we're the home to the National Centre for Writing. So yes, those are literary connections, but we see, I talked about the hook to get people into something, but the way we're then using it as a springboard is, yes, we've got, it's very ownable from the City of Stories perspective, but our stories reach beyond just the literary, and then you spring into the vintage scene, the creative scene, fashion, culture. So it's a really flexible platform, and we tested that and it was universally loved, so that's kind of the positioning that will be evolved.
Excellent. Okay, so does anybody in the audience have a question for our panel? Just pop your hand up. It's quite hard to see because we've got a light directly in our face. But yeah, pop your hand up if you have a question about place branding, particularly anything about Norwich. Oh, Lee, go on then.
Emily's nudging me, so you've always got a question. And it is a question, I promise you it's a question. But Jonny touched on it earlier. What struck me about the film and what Canada was doing was that it was not a project that they suddenly decided to start doing on one day, in the way that you're sort of doing it, Caroline, that you're very consciously trying to design the brand of Norwich City. So I'm just really curious how that is going to evolve, and if you've built evolution into the process, because it is a process, and it's not just here we go, launch and leave it, and that's the end of it. I'm just curious to find out. I want to hear all about that part, and maybe you're going to talk about that in a minute. So, if there's another part to the presentation.
It's a great question.
But it's how is that? Have you built evolution into this process, and what form does that take? How do we get involved in all that?
Okay. So shall I answer that?
I think that's what you do, yes.
I think what's happening is that there's been this appetite, and suddenly there's so many different things happening in and around the city, and they're all converging. So I don't know how much you've heard about the 2040 City Vision, so led by the City Council. It's all online, I can share the links. And it started as a kind of initiative in 2017, and they've run youth conferences as well, as stakeholder and communities. And it was before my time, but there's some wonderful engagement pieces where people are craving 5 things. I don't know if I can remember them all, but it's all about the ambition for the city of the future being and celebrating the creative city, the dynamic city, the accessible city, the livable city, the fair city, and I've probably got another one. But one of the key pieces, several key pieces, is how do we tackle homelessness and the changes there, and another example is how can we better promote the city to the world. So that was born out of people asking that we need to come together and do something about it. We just happen to have, so I don't know how much people know about the bid, but it's made up of 19 organisations across the city, including the councils, Newer, for example, and we engage with UEA, and we're going to be working together on the place piece as well. But finally, we've got a lot of people around the table, and we want to add into that the entrepreneurial audience to say, this is the ambition, how can we get behind something? And we've hopefully stress tested this platform to work for all, but as I alluded to, it's about, there are 4 pillars in the brand plan. It's what we've learned from other place branding is shared ownership, pride, participation, and authentic voices. So that's the way we're going to be launched, and then that can only evolve, and we kind of don't know what 12 months on things will look like, so that's quite exciting.
Any other questions? Yes, on this side.
Yeah, is there a segment or a demographic that you target in terms of drawing people into Norwich, or are you more sort of?
Yes. I feel like I'm.
Caroline, all yours.
Yes, certainly from a tourism point of view. We work really closely with Visit England, Visit Britain. Visit England have 17 million to spend each year creating assets to help destination marketing organisations leverage it and really understand the domestic and international tourism market. So because we are well placed as a weekend city break, we have 96% of our visitors are day trippers. So ideally we want to extend that and get them to stay longer, but there are 5 key segments for domestic tourism, and we kind of match really well with 3 specific ones. So free and easy buzz seekers, so wanting to have sort of a cultural experience, generally kid-free. Country living traditionalists, so they're newly retired but like the finer things in life. And thirdly, aspiring family fun, so something for everyone. So the other premise is about being multi-generational, very inclusive. So it's quite a hard brief to answer that. But those are the three key audiences that will orientate, but there'll also be a halo effect across all different groups.
I'll tweak that question as well a bit for you, Moritz. So the St Mary's Works plan, if you like, for the creative quarter of Norwich, which is sort of that northwestern side, isn't it? The other side, or the side of the river. Is there a sort of a target for that, and are we looking to bring people in from other regions to populate that space? Because there's, we're looking at residential space and creative space and tech, spaces. Are we looking to bring people in from other regions to fill those spaces as well?
I think not necessarily, but also for the workspaces. So one of the things that we're doing, for example, is we've got a business space in London, which we're just building out at Spitalfields, and once Spitalfields is built and St Mary's Works is built, we're going to link the two hubs. So if someone's doing business in Norwich, they can they could, for example, live up here. They could become part of the St Mary's Works community or Shoe Quarter community, have a place there, live there. We're going to have maker creator units. We're going to have a tech hub, an incubator hub, spaces for businesses where they can grow. So if you start out as a one-man band and then your business grows and you're picking up people along the way and all of a sudden you're 10 people, you're going to move into different warehouse space, and it's basically all adaptable. But at the same time, if people want to do business or have clients in London, they can go down to London. We're going to have a hotel or overnight stay spaces in both, with restaurants. So there's going to be a certain level of entertainment. You can have people over, they can stay if there's a conference, for example. And it's basically catering to that and working out basically where we would like to work as well. And then applying that to the 8,000 square meters of commercial space that we're planning at the moment. And that's just at St Mary's Works. And we're going to have a similar amount at St George's Works. So it's huge, and there's a lot of money going into it. And we're really trying to reach out and to connect to like-minded people, to hear what do people want. And St George's Works at the moment is in many ways the perfect test case, where we've spent quite little, but just created a space that's basically, it's all about the way it functions, and it didn't take that much. It's all in the community really, and that's where the good stuff happens. And with St Mary's Works, for example, we've got a chance to design it from ground up, and we can do something really cool from scratch.
That is the lovely thing we seem to have in Norwich, is this wonderful community of people that will bring stuff together, won't they, by themselves almost.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Okay, any other questions? Okay, at the front.
I guess any of you can answer this, but so in the film there, you've seen people's sort of anger over people fucking with brand marks, which are good. So what would you say some rules to live by are? Some practical rules to live by for not, I'm sure you've all worked with people who are willing to interfere with what's good. So how do you stop and guard against people wanting to interfere with what is actually good and what is actually cool about something?
Sounds like one for Jonny.
Foolproof logo.
Yeah, change it. No, I think actually that those comments at the end there in the movie were interesting to me because, again, what it was somebody who had clearly invested, part of themselves into creating an identity. It's kind of unavoidable when you create things, which had stood the test of time to a point. But then what happened is technology changed, the world changed, things moved on, advanced, and what was made before was no longer fit for purpose in the way that it was. So actually I would flip it, because I think that's probably the wrong response, maybe a slightly ignorant response, because actually what happened is somebody took it and probably put the same consideration into the adaptation as the person who created the original did. We just didn't get to see it on screen. And then therefore, obviously, if somebody changed something that I had done, I would be, disappointed. But if it's for a valid reason and it's for the advancement of culture and society, then go have at it. Anyone else? No?
Any other questions? Yes?
Hi, sorry, this is the first time knowing about the rebrand of Norwich. So
It is early doors anyway,
Yeah,
so you're in on it.
but I'm I'm a third year graphic designer anyway, and I just didn't know whether, because I'm from Norwich, but I've got a lot of friends who are coming in from different places, and I didn't know whether you've actually approached anyway, because
Yes.
we do quite a lot of briefs, which are very place orientated, so we just do loads of stuff. I didn't know whether that's useful.
We're trying to hook in with what's planned for future courses, and certainly I've got a few ideas for briefs, photography for example, so absolutely.
So we've got time for one more question. Lee sort of half put his hand up.
Nobody else has got one this one.
Anyone else other than Lee?
I do not.
Go on then, Phil. Yeah.
How will we ensure, I'll say we, because I don't know who we is in this question, but that what we try to create continues to be leading edge, if you like, continues to push the boundaries, be edgy, that it doesn't just get kind of, it doesn't stagnate over time, and in 5-10 years time we're kind of just saving, if you like, as anywhere else.
Good question. Who'd like to answer that one?
I think from just my direct personal experience, I think building in the architecture, for example, quite often when you walk down a street and you look at signage, it's quite annoying because a lot of it is so bad, shop fronts, etc., etc. So it's building in a certain element of control so that things can happen within a certain framework, but then also allowing whoever owns it in 5 years or 10 years to then take that element and do something with it. Peter Zumthor, a famous Swiss architect, who's quite famous, designed this thermal spa place in Switzerland called Therme Wals, I think. And he literally designed the entire place down to the bathrobes that the guests had to wear when they enter the building and then when they're in the spa. And I think having an overarching approach and working it out really well, so it's kind of, there's some proof for the future that it's good design is key, but then within that you need to give the future room to breathe and flexibility. But that's just from a very architectural point of view. I don't know if that answered your question.
I'd probably add to that as well, because I think you're right. Obviously a shared vision that's the case, mandated somewhere, probably some degree of accountability across all of us and in the creative industry that is the thing that we're all working for. Youth helps. Yeah. Because the more we can encourage people who are maybe more on the pulse than those of us that have been doing it a fair while are, that also helps. I think would be the things that I would look to instill if it was me.
I was going to say as well from the film. Sorry, I'm kind of interrupting it, but I'm doing me. There was a lot of multiculturalism, so the Europeans brought over a lot of the design to Canada, and actually that changed things for the better, obviously. So, and I think Norwich is known for not being very multicultural in the past. So maybe that will also push things on as well, when more people from all over the world will come to Norwich.
Demographically, we're a very young city, so it is changing, definitely. But I'd also add to what you said about if there's a clear vision and spirit of the place, then as long as you're true to that, things can change, and how you activate the brand might change. So for example, with the wayfinding, we're baking in some technology that maybe point to different places over time, depending on what's happening. So, but I don't think you always have to be edgy, because it needs to have some kind of confidence that this will stand the test of time as well. But it will obviously evolve.
Okay, so just before we finish up, so one of the things that really struck me about the film, I was lucky enough this week to get a really short sneak preview of some of the branding work that Caroline and her team have been working on. And I was absolutely stunned when I saw today that the centenary logo, the one of the Canadian flag that's broken into pieces, that was made in 1967 or so, the approach to how they've created that logo that is so well known still today is almost identical to the approach that's been taken in the new Norwich branding. It is stunningly close. And so I kind of want to just finish off with letting you speak for just a minute or two about what we can expect, because obviously you're about to launch this branding. It's next month, isn't it, I think?
7th of May.
7th of May. Which is 2 days before the next hot sauce, by the way, 9th of May, where we will be exploring this new branding, and we'll be asking Caroline to come back, and we'll be looking at ways that we can actually all get involved in something which should be, part of what the city's about, and we should all be involved in the growth of this branding across, many, many years to come. But what I'd like to do really is just let you sort of talk a little bit about what we should expect in May, and about some of the work perhaps that you've been doing. And if you haven't seen the trailer yet, so there's a 30-second trailer, isn't there, of the things that you've been working on. It's worth having a quick look because it's really exciting. We will tweet the link out a bit later on today so you can have a look. But over to you to kind of tell us a little bit more
in
about
a
what
nutshell.
you're doing.
Goodness, okay, I'm going to pitch to you. So I'm trying to think of the plan on a page. So we have quite an ambition for the city. We're currently, with the tourism lens, 29th when it comes to a destination for people to go to in the country. We want to be a top 20 by next year, ideally top 10, but I need more cash to do that. We've done so much research on audience insight, and we know that we need to create a true love of a city before it's even on someone's radar. So we need to create a sense of how you will feel when you're there. So therefore we need to grab the hearts and minds. And the way we're going to do that is through things that can be shareable, such as film, photography and audio. We know that in the past you have sort of facts and figures about a place, but that's going to play second fiddle to how a city makes you feel. So this is kind of informing everything we're doing. But our brand insight is that Norwich is truly a city of firsts, mavericks. We've got the first public library was born here. We've got Julian of Norwich, who was the first published female author from hundreds of years ago. So we have many firsts, and we're going to share all these amazing facts and figures. There are so many stories from history, but also the present. I think what's unique about Norwich is that's how we've got this environment where you've got the very oldest medieval city living with the new, and this whole ecosystem together makes us very special. And it's all to do with where we are situated in the UK, and we should celebrate that rather than apologise for it. So as I mentioned about those 4 pillars about how we can do this collectively, the platform is the City of Stories. But what we're currently doing, we had a conference last week initially on tourism, but we're collecting stories. Everyone has a story of Norwich, therefore we want it to be inclusive, multi-generational. So we've got these little postcards. I need to grab them for tonight actually. But we're going to digitise that from the 7th. So the 7th, we wanted to have a bit of how can we animate the city and do a bit of intervention in the city. It is a Tuesday, it's a bit random. The reason that day has been chosen is we wanted to be, it's after the bank holiday, it's before the festival launches on the 10th, so a bit of a plug. There's a free event which is a tightrope walk across the city on Friday the 10th, so please do come along for the Norfolk and Norwich Festival opening night, which we're sponsoring. But hopefully that's something for everybody. But equally we've got the new map for the city that's going to be in distribution from the 13th of May. Now the exciting piece is that we're remapping the city. We already have quite a lot of distinct areas, whether that be the Cathedral Quarter, Riverside or Castle and Marketplace. But there's a couple of new areas that we're exploring, so the Business District and the Creative Quarter. And there are 8 elements, there are 8 areas, there are 8 colours in the new palette. And it's quite a sophisticated palette, and it's been the spirit of the colours that already sort of spark up in those areas anyway. So there are 8 elements to the mark. So that's kind of a bit of a teaser, really. Does that give a flavour, or do you want anything else?
I mean, if you'd like to know more, you're going to join us for a pint, aren't you, next door? So
I do have the creative with me, if anyone wants to.
There you go, sneaky peeks.
I just can't put it
Be
up
the
on
first.
the screen. Yeah.
So if you'd like to see it, just get Caroline a little bit pissed. So we're going to have to wrap it up there. So I just want to say a few quick thank yous again. So thank you again to the User Story and Foolproof for sponsoring tonight. We couldn't have done it without those two, so thank you very much. To my co-organisers, Philip, Kate, Rob, Alex, you are brilliant. Thank you very much for giving up your time to help to put these events on.
You too, Tom.
Thank you.
Thank you. Please come along on the 9th of May if you'd like to have a look at this branding once it's launched, and then start to do some cool stuff with it. Please come along on the 9th of May to do that. We'll launch details of that very soon on Meetup. Our next event is on the 13th of June. That's going to be about typography, and we'd love you to come along to that. And finally, just thank you so much to my panellists for this evening, to John, Caroline and Moritz. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you.